Welcome to Twilight Fables. Tonight, we journey into a kingdom shrouded in silence, where love demands sacrifice and the forest listens. This is a tale of thorns, of brothers who fly, and a girl who bleeds in silence. But not all curses come from witches. Some take root in the soil and whisper in the wind. This is the story of the Wild Swans. The nettles did not bleed until the third girl entered the forest. She was not the first to come barefoot through the thinning trees, nor would she be the last, though the townspeople had stopped counting long ago. The first girl had vanished before the dew dried on her footprints. The second was found with lips sewn shut and her fingers wrapped in barbed roots, her eyes open, but her soul long fled. The third girl, though, her name was Elisa, and the forest wept when she arrived. Elisa did not weep. She had already used up her tears. The curse had taken her brothers first, 11 of them, each with hair like fire and laughter like flutes, now wore wings of white and black. They flew by day, circling the castle like ghosts refusing to leave the land of the living. By night, they returned to their human forms, naked and pale, trembling in the shadows of the old ruins outside the village. They never came home. They couldn't. The Queen, her stepmother, had made sure of that. "I only wanted quiet," the woman had said once, before her wedding day, when Elisa was still allowed in the throne room. Peace, no prattling boys, no rough hands, just a house that listens. Elisa hadn't understood then. She did now. The witch queen had brought silence to the palace in the form of a curse that turned princes to birds and a sister into a vessel of pain. The court called it tragic. The queen called it mercy. Only Elisa remained untouched, but not unscarred. She had spent 2 years searching for a way to undo the curse. 2 years wandering across hills and wild plains, chasing rumours whispered by midwives and madmen, until, in a dream steeped in violet shadow, her dead mother came to her and spoke 3 words: weeping wood, shirts. The weeping wood lay beyond the last village, past rivers no one drank from, and roads not marked on maps. It had no gates, only mouths, where the trees opened to swallow those foolish enough to seek it. Elisa entered barefoot, wearing nothing but a shift and a leather satchel. Her hands were still stained with soot from the offering fire she had burned for guidance the night before. The forest was already waiting. At first, it was quiet, not a stillness, but a hush, like the air before a confession. The deeper she walked, the thicker the silence grew, pressing against her skin, crawling into her ears. Every leaf underfoot sounded muffled, like she was walking on skin. The trees were tall, impossibly so, their trunks mottled with grey and violet bark that pulsed faintly in the gloom. Their branches hung low and heavy with dark netting leaves. each trembling slightly as she passed beneath them. After 3 days, she found the nettles. They grew in circles, perfect rings, as if sewn into the ground. Their stems were black-green, their thorns glassy and curved. The air around them shimmered faintly, like heat rising from stone, though the forest was cold. Elisa approached the first ring and knelt. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something worse, recognition. Each nettle bore thorns that looked like teeth, and when she reached out and plucked one, it screamed, not aloud, but in her mind, a sound like nails against bone, a sound like a voice she once knew. She did not drop it. She bent forward and began to gather them one by one, ignoring the rising heat beneath her skin, the ache forming behind her eyes. She did not stop until her arms were full and bleeding. Then she sat at the centre of the circle and began to weave. The rules of the curse were cruel but clear. One shirt for each brother, made from the nettles that grew in cursed soil. Not a word must pass her lips until the final stitch. Not a cry, not a whisper. Silence was the spell's thread. But no one had warned her that the nettles were alive, not just in the way all plants breathe, but aware. As she wove the first shirt, the thorns burrowed into her palms, nesting under her skin. Blood soaked into the fabric, turning it dark and wet. Yet the nettles did not die. They fed on it. Threads slithered of their own accord. One coiled around her wrist, then stopped, as if surprised to be noticed. By the 3rd day, her fingers were covered in weeping blisters. Her lips were cracked from thirst. Her eyes stung from the nettle's pollen, fine and glittering like powdered glass. Still, she wove. Each stitch was an act of defiance, not against the curse, but against the forest itself. The weeping wood did not want to let her go. At night, she slept with one eye open. The trees shifted when she closed both. She began to dream of faces in the bark, women with hollow eyes and mouths stuffed with nettles, girls who had come before. Some of them still moved. On the 7th night, one of them came to her. She arrived silently, as if grown from the moss. A girl with white hair and blackened feet, her skin grey with bark. Where her mouth should have been, there was only a jagged line of thorns stitched shut. Elisa did not scream. The girl knelt beside her and reached for the half-finished shirt. Her fingers brushed it, and a ripple passed through the fabric. It began to unravel. Elisa slapped her hand away. The ghost girl tilted her head and slowly opened her hand. Inside her palm lay a single tooth, too large to be human. It pulsed once, then cracked in half. From the tooth came a voice, not the girl's, but one Elisa knew, her brother Edwin. "You're too late," the voice rasped. "We are not who we were. The swans remember blood." The ghost girl stood and placed the tooth at the edge of the nettle circle, then vanished into the trees. Elisa did not sleep the rest of the night. By the time she finished the first shirt, her skin was a map of wounds. Her eyes bled when she blinked, but she had not spoken, not once. Her voice was locked beneath her ribs, pounding against her lungs. She held the shirt up, and the nettles writhed. They twisted into feathers, not quite real, and the shirt breathed for a moment. Then it lay still. She did not know if it would work. The magic was mute, but it was a beginning. She turned to reach for more nettles, and found the forest had moved. The ring was gone. The trees now stood where the nettles had been. The ground pulsed beneath her knees, and in the distance something laughed, a sound like wind through broken flutes. The weeping wood did not appreciate progress. Elisa stood slowly. Her legs were weak, but her resolve was iron. She would find another ring. She would gather more nettles. She would bleed and blister and bite her tongue until it split, but she would finish all 11, because her brothers were waiting, because silence was the only sound the forest respected, and because the woods could not have her soul if she never stopped weaving. By the time Elisa found the second nettle ring, she had begun to taste copper in her mouth, not from blood, but from silence. It grew like rust behind her teeth, staining her breath, curling along her tongue like ivy. She hadn't made a sound in 9 days. The forest had started speaking for her, not in words, in arrangement. Each time she slept, she awoke to find something had changed. Trees she had marked with small scratches were smooth again. The sky, where it dared peek through the boughs, shifted colours that had no names. The moon rose when it shouldn't. At times, it hung sideways in the sky, like a severed eye, but the worst were the footprints. She never heard them, but each morning, there they were, prints too large to be human, wide and three-toed, pressed deep into the loam, near where she lay. They were not always in pairs, sometimes a single one, sometimes none, sometimes one facing her and one facing away, as though something had circled her in the night and changed its mind. Elisa did not question it. She was beyond fear. Only the shirts mattered. The second nettle ring grew around a tree that bled when touched. Its bark was pale and striated like old bone, and at its base, nettles bloomed in grotesque abundance. When she cut the first stalk, the tree moaned. She froze. The moan had not come from the air, but the earth from beneath her feet, deep and sorrowful, like a mourning bell buried in soil. She waited. The sound didn't repeat. She reached again. The second nettle burned worse than the first. The thorns bit deep, latching under her nail beds. She stifled the urge to cry out, biting the inside of her cheek until blood dripped from her chin. It tasted like nettle pollen. She filled her arms with stalks and returned to her weaving spot, an outcrop of moss-covered stone she had chosen for its relative stillness. By the time the sun had begun to descend or rise, it was hard to tell. Her lap was full of burning green, and her fingers trembled uncontrollably. As she wove, the forest watched, not metaphorically, not the way people say a place feels alive. Elisa had long since discarded such language, because the trees leaned closer, their bark shifted, pulsing in slow heartbeats. Their branches twitched when the wind did not blow. Their roots cracked through stone and slid toward her, pausing when she looked up, as if hoping not to be seen. And the whispering began. It started faint, like distant rain, but there was no storm, no clouds. The sound grew sharper with each hour she worked. It didn't surround her, it curled into her ears. At first, she couldn't understand the words. They came from too many voices, too layered, old, dry, like pages fluttering in a furnace. But as she finished the second sleeve of the shirt, she heard one word clearly. Elisa. She dropped the nettle. The sound stopped. Blood dripped from her wrist, where the thorn had sliced her, staining the weave. She looked up. Nothing moved, except the roots. They had crept closer, threading into the edges of her woven fabric like curious fingers. She stood, forcing her breath to stay steady. Her silence trembled, but held. She backed away, clutching the half-finished shirt, and turned toward the nearby clearing she had used the night before to rest. But the clearing was gone. In its place, a wall of trees, thick and new, covered in bark that shimmered faintly, like wet stone. Behind her, something sighed. Elisa ran. She ran until her feet blistered and her breath rasped from her nose like steam. She did not cry. She did not shout. Her voice remained sealed. She did not look back until she tripped over a skull. It was small, human, and old. Lichen bloomed across its temple, and moss sprouted from the hollow eye sockets. A single tooth was missing. She rose shakily, clutching the second shirt, and turned to examine the ground. More bones, femurs like stakes, a broken rib cage splayed like wings. Then she saw the statue. At first she thought it was a tree, then she thought it was a person. It was both. A woman-shaped figure, tall and crooked, made of bark and braided hair, stood at the centre of the glade. Her face was frozen in a screen. Her arms reached skyward, knotted with branches, her fingers tangled in vines. Her dress, what remained of it, was woven of nettles, and fused to her chest was a half-finished shirt. Elisa stepped back, horrified. Another girl who had tried, another who failed. The statue's eyes were hollow, but not empty. Something shimmered inside, like sap or gold. She took another step back, and the statue moved. Just the fingers, a slight twitch. Elisa froze. The wooden woman's jaw didn't open, but a sound emerged, a whisper without air. It spilled into Elisa's mind, like smoke through a crack in the wall. "You are late," it said. "Too many threads, too little time." Elisa shook her head violently. "I made it farther than you," she mouthed, though she made no sound. The forest could not have her voice, the statue pulsed. "Did you?" The ground beneath the statue split, and roots unfurled. Beneath them was not soil, but flesh, petrified, pale, pressed flat by centuries of weight. Dozens of faces stared up from the ground. Girls, silent, forgotten. Elisa turned and ran again. She did not stop until she reached the river. It cut through the forest like a scar, wide and grey-green, moving without sound. The banks were covered in round stones, some natural, some carved. One bore a name, Alicet, another, Rowan. Elisa did not want to find her own. She knelt to drink. The water was cold, metallic. Her reflection was faint, her hair matted with blood, her eyes sunken. Behind her, in the water's shimmer, she saw movement, white wings. She spun. Across the river stood 11 swans. They were motionless, watching her. Their feathers dripped shadow instead of water. Their eyes were human. She dropped the half-finished shirt and ran to the water's edge. Her brothers, come to her. She fell to her knees, mouth open, but stopped herself just in time. No sound, no word. The swans tilted their heads. Then they moved, not toward her, but away, vanishing into the trees. She wanted to scream. Instead, she picked up the shirt again and followed the riverbank, searching for another nettle ring. Her bare feet leaving trails of blood behind her. By the end of the second week, she had finished the second shirt. Her hands were no longer hands. They were raw tools of pain, blistered and broken, stained red-black with blood and sap. The shirts, now 2, breathed faintly when she held them. One had begun to twitch when touched, like it remembered being a wing, but still no sign of the curse lifting, and the forest was growing impatient. It tested her resolve, changing her path, whispering old lullabies in her mother's voice. It made her dream of warmth and feasts and voices calling her name with joy. Each morning she woke colder. The silence had entered her bones. She did not know how many days remained. She only knew she could not stop. On the night before the third shirt began, she returned to the river to wash her hands. The blood had dried thick beneath her nails, and the nettle juice had stained her wrists green. The water shimmered. She looked down. A face stared back, not her own. It was one of the statue girls, her bark-covered eyes wide, her mouth open in a silent wail. Behind her, the trees loomed closer. Elisa jerked back, and the reflection vanished. But the voice came again, not aloud, never aloud. It poured into her mind like ash in wind. You are sewing your own skin. She did not listen. She could not afford to. By morning, a new nettle ring had grown. This one was different, larger, wilder. The stalks moved even when still. They bent toward her as she approached, their thorns gleaming like teeth in the dim forest light. She did not hesitate. She stepped into the circle. The nettles leaned in and purred, and from the woods behind her, something large breathed in the dark. She did not turn. She began the third shirt, and the forest began to sing. The forest sang in tongues, not in melody, nor harmony, nothing so human. It sang through the creaking of trees and the slither of moss, the hum of beetles crawling beneath bark, the low grinding moans of stone swallowed by root. It was a song of hunger, of memory, of blood soaked into the soil so deeply it turned the roots black. Elisa heard it with her bones. She wove anyway. The third shirt was the hardest yet. The nettles from this ring bled freely as she cut them, releasing a dark, viscous sap that clung to her hands and made the air shimmer. Her fingers blistered anew with each handful, but the pain was expected now, welcomed even. It meant she still had flesh. With each loop and knot, she imagined her brother's wings unravelling. She could almost hear feathers tearing as human skin reformed beneath them. Not all at once, just one shirt at a time. Edwin first, perhaps. His laugh had always come first in her memories, then Adrian, then Theo, but the forest wanted her to forget. It twisted their names, burying them under half-remembered songs. She found herself weaving to a rhythm not her own, one that pulsed beneath her feet and hummed through the bark. Sometimes she caught her fingers moving differently, as if the nettles were leading the pattern. Sometimes she let them. By the third night, she saw the girl again, the bark statue woman, the failed weaver. She stood not far from the new ring, half hidden behind a curtain of moss, unmoving, but this time her face had changed. There was recognition in her hollow eyes. Elisa did not rise. She kept weaving, but she watched from the corner of her eye. The statue lifted one arm, creaking like an old tree in wind. Her wooden fingers opened. Inside her palm, a single braid of black hair, knotted 3 times. Elisa knew it, her mother's braid. It had been buried with her beneath white flowers in the western chapel garden. The statue tilted her head. The braid fell to the moss. She vanished. Elisa kept weaving, but her hands trembled. She did not cry. There was no space left in her body for tears. That night, the weeping wood changed again. She awoke to find herself in a clearing of bones, not dozens, hundreds, rib cages curled like blossoms, spines arranged in spirals, skulls propped on stumps, mouths gaping in mute laughter, and in the centre, a tree that hadn't been there before. It was black, smooth, perfect. It had no leaves. Its branches rose like arms in prayer. At its base sat a girl, or something that had once been one. She was folded, knees to chest, her arms tangled in nettles. They grew from her mouth, her eyes, her wrists. The vines pulsed faintly, breathing. Her skin was pale, translucent, showing veins that no longer flowed. The thorns had become a crown around her brow. A half-woven shirt lay in her lap. Elisa approached slowly, heart thudding. The girl didn't move. She might have been dead for days or decades. The shirt, though, stirred. A small wind tugged at it. It rustled, not like cloth, but like flesh. The sleeves curled toward Elisa's hands. She reached for it and stopped. The air grew cold. Behind her, something groaned. She turned and saw the swans. They stood at the clearing's edge, human now, naked and pale, 11 brothers wrapped in night. But something was wrong. Their skin shimmered faintly, feathered at the edges. Their eyes were wrong, too sharp, too wide. They watched her, not like siblings, but like predators, uncertain if she was prey. Edwin stepped forward. "Elisa," he said. His voice was cracked, brittle, like it had forgotten how to speak. She stared. He held out his hand. "You must stop." She blinked. He stepped closer. The others remained still. "You're feeding it," he whispered. She wanted to speak, to ask, but her lips were sealed by will and curse. Her silence trembled. Edwin reached for her face. "Listen," he said. "It's not the shirts. It's you. The more you weave, the more it grows." She took a step back. His fingers brushed her cheek. Behind him, Theo whispered, "She's already part of it." Elisa turned and ran. The forest did not chase her. It opened for her. The trees bent. Their roots recoiled. The moss parted like flesh. It wanted her to keep going, to weave, to finish. The third shirt flapped behind her, unfinished but alive. She ran until her knees gave out, until her hands bled from catching thorns, until the trees grew so dense they wrapped around her ankles and stopped her like chains. She collapsed beside a dying fire pit, one she didn't remember making. There, beside the ashes, lay a name scratched into the stone. Elisa. She stared. The letters were deep, fresh, as if someone or something knew she'd come. She sat, the third shirt in her lap, and she began to weave again. Days passed, or hours, or years. Time was swallowed in the weeping wood. Each shirt took more than the last, not just blood, but memory. She began forgetting faces, her mother's hands, her father's cough, the smell of their castle kitchens, of horses, of rain. She remembered only wings, and roots, and silence. Her voice ached in her chest, a caged animal gnawing at the ribs, but she did not let it escape. If she spoke, she would lose everything. When the fourth shirt was done, she found the girl waiting, the statue one, now closer to flesh. Her wooden face had softened. Her bark had cracked in places to reveal skin beneath. She held something wrapped in nettle leaves, a mirror. Elisa took it, weary. In the reflection, her face was not hers. Her skin was pale and veined like tree bark. Her eyes glowed faintly green. Her hair was threaded with moss. She dropped the mirror. The bark girl touched her cheek gently, a sympathy not born of kindness, but of recognition. We are becoming the same, her eyes said. Elisa turned away. She picked up more nettles. That night she saw a fire through the trees, not one she had made. A camp, flickering light, smoke. She approached cautiously and saw people, real ones, a band of villagers armed with torches and blades, 8 or 10 of them, rough men and women wrapped in furs, marked with talismans of protection. They were hunting her. She heard their words in snatches. Curse, witch, unnatural, daughter of the devil. One held a crude drawing, her face circled in red ink. Elisa, one spat, still lives in the cursed wood. Must be she keeping the beasts alive. No one else enters and survives. Another, they say her voice curses trees, that she speaks and bark peels from bone. Elisa stepped back. A twig cracked beneath her heel. The camp fell silent. Someone pointed. There. She turned and fled into the dark. They followed. The forest fought to slow them. Roots rose to trip. Trees moved to block. But some broke through. One man got close enough to swing a blade at her shoulder. The shirt she carried blocked it. The blade snapped. The man screamed. Elisa kept running. She lost them by the river, ducking into an old hollow beneath a gnarled willow. She curled there, clutching the shirt, sobbing without sound. The shirt pulsed in her arms like a heartbeat. When morning came, the men were gone. In their place, crows, dozens of them, each perched silently in the trees above, watching, waiting. Elisa wept without tears and began the 5th shirt. The 5th shirt drained her, not just her blood or strength, but something deeper, something once called Elisa. She felt it peeling away, stitch by stitch, not in pain, but in acceptance, as if she was not surrendering to the forest, but returning to it, like she'd never been meant to leave. The silence inside her had changed. At first, it had been a burden, a cage wrapped around her tongue. Now, it breathed with her. It beat in time with her heart. It whispered not in words, but in stillness. And when she finished the 5th shirt, the forest whispered back. The whisper came not from the trees this time, but from beneath, from the soil. She had just tied off the final stitch, her fingers trembling and raw, when the earth beneath her hummed. The sound was low, like a prayer buried too deep to be remembered. The moss trembled under her knees. A patch of ground beside her opened, quietly, cleanly, like a mouth. A staircase descended into dark. Steps carved from roots and bone. She should have run. She should have burned the shirts and fled into the sun. Instead, she stood, took the 5th shirt under her arm, and descended. The light faded instantly. The tunnel swallowed her without ceremony. Her bare feet sank into something soft. Earth, yes, but warmer, like old flesh. The walls shimmered with fungus that pulsed faintly, illuminating carvings that lined the passage. Not letters, not symbols, faces, dozens, hundreds, chiselled in pain, open mouths, hollow eyes, each different, all screaming in silence. She did not look away. At the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel widened into a chamber, and in the chamber stood a tree, or something that had once worn the shape of a tree. Its trunk was hollow, its bark pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. From its branches hung 11 white feathers, each stained at the tip with red. They shifted in wind that didn't blow. Roots crawled across the floor like veins. In the centre of the trunk, an opening gaped, womb-shaped, shadowed. Elisa approached slowly. As she neared, the tree spoke, not aloud, but directly to her blood. "You bring me threads," it said. Elisa clutched the shirt tighter. "You wear the silence well." A root reached for her. She stepped back. "Do you wish to know?" it asked. She hesitated. The tree pulsed again, and in its voice she heard 11 overlapping tones, each one a piece of a brother, not whole, fractured, struggling. "Elisa, leave, run, finish, forget." The voices bled into one another, a tapestry unravelled, and then the tree said, "Your weaving feeds me. With each shirt I become real. Your brothers are only wings. I am root." She turned and fled. The tunnel closed behind her. She burst onto the surface, with lungs gasping and knees bleeding. The shirts were still there, all 5, breathing faintly in a bundle. She did not rest. She began the 6th. The forest tried to stop her, this time not with whispers or illusions, but with pleas. On her way to find the next nettle ring, she passed through a clearing where the air was strangely still. At its centre, a child, a little girl in a green dress, her face pale, her eyes too old. She sat on a stone and sang without sound. When Elisa stepped closer, the girl turned her head. In her hands, she held a shirt, not nettle, silk, pure and white. She offered it up. A voice, not hers, echoed inside Elisa's skull. "You can speak. Take this, wear it, end the curse." Elisa stared. The shirt smelled of flowers and warmth, and things long dead. She stepped back. The girl's eyes darkened. "If you speak," she whispered, "they'll die faster, but it will be easier." Elisa said nothing. The girl stood, her skin cracked. Nettles burst from her mouth, like smoke. She dissolved into vines. Elisa wept silently and walked on. The 6th ring grew in a swamp. Nettles there grew taller than her, bending under their own weight, dripping with acidic sap. Each stalk hissed when cut. The water beneath her feet was black and thick. It clung to her ankles like hands. She worked standing, knee-deep in rot. The stench was unbearable. By the time she finished half the shirt, her skin had blistered from the water. Her lips were cracked, her eyes swollen. Her hair fell out in clumps. but the shirt pulsed stronger than the others. It wanted to be finished. On the third night in the swamp, the villagers returned. She saw their torches flickering beyond the reeds. They had dogs now, lean things, eyes blind, muzzles blood-stained. She climbed a dead tree to hide. The bark peeled beneath her fingers. Insects crawled under her skin. Below, she heard the men argue. She's feeding the forest. Look how thick it grows. Witch, burn her out. They say she bleeds nettles now. Someone spat. A dog sniffed the air and barked. She held her breath. Then a shriek. A man impaled by root. Another swallowed by the mud. The swamp defended her. The men fled. The dogs stayed. They waited at the edge of the tree all night, panting. When dawn broke, they were gone. But in their place, feathers, dozens of them, white with red tips, scattered like snow. Elisa climbed down and began again. The seventh shirt took her the longest. The forest no longer gave nettles freely. She had to climb trees to find them. She scraped her arms raw. Her feet split from walking. Her hands no longer closed without pain. She slept in short bursts. She forgot her own name, but she never forgot their names. Each stitch was a prayer. Edwin, Adrian, Theo, Marcus, Felix, Jules, Rowan, Elias, Bastian, Leo, Nico, all cursed, all waiting, all counting on her. On the night the seventh shirt was finished, she saw the Swan Queen. She emerged from the trees like moonlight, tall, winged, faceless. Her form was all feather and shadow and crown. Her voice came from everywhere. You love them, the Queen said. Elisa nodded. Will you die for them? She paused, then nodded again. The Queen tilted her head. They are not what you remember. The forest has changed them. You have changed. Elisa clutched the shirts to her chest. They will hate you when they see what you've become. She didn't move. The Queen reached out a winged hand and touched her cheek. For a moment, Elisa saw herself, not as she was, but as the world would see her. Feral, filthy, bark creeping up her neck, eyes too wide, hands no longer hands, a creature, a witch, a daughter of root and thorn. Then the Queen whispered, good, and vanished. She awoke to find the eighth ring already grown around her, as if the forest had accepted her answer. She did not hesitate. She bent to gather nettles with hands that bled willingly, and the trees leaned closer. The first true frost came overnight. Elisa awoke to find her hands nearly fused to the nettle threads, as if the forest had tried to claim her fingers in her sleep. Her breath misted before her face. The dampness in the cave turned to a fine film of ice along the walls. Her skirts were stiff, and even the woven nettles had grown brittle, cracking if she moved them too fast. The weeping wood had grown quiet. No more rustling leaves that mimicked voices. No more long sighs through the branches, or wet, gurgling bird calls. Only the sound of her own movement, slow and laborious, remained. She forced herself up and dragged her satchel close. 5 shirts completed, 6 if she counted the half-done one on her lap. Each was clumsy, burned through with red, where blood had soaked into the threads. She had stopped washing them, the nettles stained with her pain, proof that she was doing it right. The cold made her slower. She could no longer sleep through the night. The ache in her bones and fire in her hands kept her awake. She hadn't seen the deer again, nor the red-eyed things beneath the roots. She tried not to think of them at all, but that night, as she stitched beside a small fire of foraged branches, the wind carried something that hadn't come in days. A smell like rot, like carrion left to thaw, like fur turned damp from the inside out. It wafted from the south, from the deeper parts of the weeping wood. Elisa clutched the shirt tighter, but her hands trembled. The stench was familiar. It reminded her of the wolf deer, the one with the broken jaw and human teeth. But there was more to it now, a wetness, a heat, and the sound that followed wasn't the voice of her brother. It was a scream. She stood too fast, dizzy from hunger, and stumbled to the mouth of the cave. Nothing stirred in the trees, nothing visible, but the scream came again, distant but real. It was not a cry of fear, it was rage, agony, a tearing of lungs into the air itself. It was female. Elisa looked to the sky. The moon was waning. Her brothers would not be human tonight. They could not help her. She stepped from the cave and left the half-finished shirt behind. The trail was old, overgrown, roots gnarled around the stones like fingers. Elisa walked barefoot, unwilling to waste time putting on the stiff boots that made her ankles bleed. Her feet were thick with calluses now, like hooves more than soles. She moved quietly. The screams had gone silent. She passed a fallen tree and saw something etched into the bark. A symbol, a curved spiral, crossed through with a vertical slash. The mark sent a shudder through her. She'd seen it before, long ago, on the hearth of her childhood home. Her nursemaid used to wear it around her neck, carved in bone. When she'd asked what it meant, the woman simply said, "Silence is not absence." Now it was carved into the trees of the weeping wood, fresh, deep. The forest grew denser as she walked. The trees pressed in close. Moss hung in sheets like drowned hair. The earth felt damp under her feet, and the air grew thicker, heavier, as if it were struggling to remain breathable. Then she saw the first of them, a shape, hunched beside a dead oak, thin, pale, cloaked in roots. A girl. Elisa froze. The figure didn't move, but the wind pulled at its hair. Long, black and stiff. Elisa crept closer. Her fingers trembled. When she was near enough to see the face, she stopped breathing. The girl's eyes were open, her lips parted, but she was stone, not in metaphor, truly. Her skin had the colour and texture of carved granite, speckled with lichen. The roots that wrapped her weren't simply overgrown. They pierced her arms and legs, like thorns staking her to the tree. And her hands clutched a half-finished nettle shirt. Elisa dropped to her knees. Another girl, another Elisa perhaps, from another time. One who'd walked into the weeping wood, believing the same promises. Save the brothers, sew the shirts, keep silent. She reached out, fingertips, brushing the rough cloth. The stone girl's mouth opened wider, not by breath, not by will, but because something inside her jaw was shifting. Elisa scrambled back, heart thrashing. The girl's head tilted unnaturally to the side, the stone creaking like ice cracking in a thaw, and from her lips came a sound, a whisper, not words, just a breath, a sharp intake of air. The forest echoed with rustling. Behind Elisa, another stone girl, and another, farther back. Each clutched a nettle shirt in progress. Each wore the same vacant face, but now their mouths opened, one by one, drawing breath as if something long dormant had scented her, and now fed from the sound of her heartbeat. Elisa ran. She did not stop until her knees buckled. When she finally fell, it was into a hollow choked with dead leaves and stagnant water. She pressed her hands to her ears and bit her tongue to stifle her gasps. The air was thick with rot again, not from the stone girls, but from something else. She looked up. Across the shallow hollow, nestled between twisted roots, stood a creature. It looked like a man at first, cloaked in ragged feathers, arms too long, hunched forward as if bowing. But as it lifted its head, she saw the face was split down the middle, not scarred, opened, as if someone had tried to pull the skin apart like bark from a tree. From within, something moved, not flesh, not bone, wings, small ones, black, nesting within the hollow skull. The creature's mouth moved. It said nothing, but Elisa heard it, not in sound, in memory. Her father's voice. No tears, Elisa, we are of royal blood. Then her nursemaids. Silence is not absence. Then a dozen others, 100. The forest, speaking with the voices of the dead. All of them, hers. The creature stepped forward, its feet digging into the loam like claws. Behind it, wings unfurled from its back, black, broken, dripping with bramble thorns. Not the wings of her brothers. These were older, hungrier. The creature held something out to her, a shirt, one she had sewn, but the fabric writhed, twisted, shifted in its hands like a living thing. Not nettle, not thread, but roots and sinew, woven into something that pulsed. Elisa stared at it. It wasn't a gift, it was a warning. She was feeding the forest. She made it back to the cave by dawn. Her hands were shaking, her knees bloodied. The cold had returned, but her body burned from within, feverish. She collapsed beside her shirts. They looked different now, no longer like acts of devotion, no longer like gifts for her brothers. They were skin, they were offerings. The cave whispered as the wind passed over the entrance. A single word, a name, Elisa. She pressed her hands to her ears and closed her eyes. The next shirt had to be finished, even if it was the last thing her hands ever touched, even if her voice turned to dust in her throat, even if the weeping wood turned her to stone. She would finish them all. The cold stone floor of the tower cell held Elisa like a second skin, damp, unyielding, and laced with the bitter scent of rot. Her lips were cracked from silence, her fingers shredded from the nettles, and her dress in tatters. She had completed 11 shirts. The 12th lay unfinished in her lap, the coarse fibres weeping green, where her blood had soaked in. Outside, the wind howled through the barred window like a warning whispered too late. Each day in the cell bled into the next, marked only by the arrival of the guards, who brought stale bread and murky water, sneering at her silence. They joked about witches and burning, about the gallows being built, about her black eyes that never blinked when they insulted her. But Elisa heard nothing but the trees. They had followed her here every night. When the torchlight withdrew and the cell turned to pitch, she would hear the trees in her mind. The weeping wood had not abandoned her. It had planted itself inside her, and now its roots tangled around her memories. She dreamed of bark curling her like skin, of branches arching to cradle her broken frame, of mouths in trunks whispering her name. Some nights she woke to the phantom sting of nettles being woven into her lungs. Others she awoke to weeping, sometimes her own, sometimes not. But the most haunting was the lullaby, a slow, rusted tune, hummed by no human voice. Just beyond her window, it rose like smoke, dry and creaking and ancient. It filled her head until the nettles trembled in her lap, as though remembering the hands that had sung it first. And then, one night, the cell door creaked open. Elisa did not move. She expected the guards, but the silhouette that stepped through the doorway was not wearing armour. It was the Queen Mother. She entered alone, carrying no torch. In the moonlight, her gown shimmered like beetle wings, dark green with hints of copper, the colour of forest undergrowth. Her face was sharp, too sharp, eyes glittering with restrained contempt. She shut the door and stood silently, surveying Elisa as one might a mounted specimen. "You do not speak," she said at last. Her voice was low, silken. "Not a word, since you were brought to this place. Why?" Elisa remained still, fingers locked over the nettle shirt in her lap. The Queen Mother stepped closer. "There are rumours, you know. The townsfolk think you've been taken by the devil, that you were found in a cursed grove. They say the forest bleeds for you." Still silence. "I've seen the shirts," the Queen continued, circling her like a patient wolf. "Such strange craftsmanship, and always 12. Do you think I do not recognize symbols when I see them? This is not penance. This is spell work. Elisa's hands trembled. The Queen crouched, close enough now that Elisa could smell the lavender and iron on her breath. Are you trying to bring someone back? She asked. A lover, perhaps? Or are you binding your soul to something else entirely? Elisa lowered her eyes. She could not, must not, speak, not even now. The Queen stood again, brushing dust from her sleeves. The gallows are nearly complete, she said casually. You will hang in 2 days' time. I had considered burning you, but there's something indecent about it. Hanging feels cleaner. With that, she turned, but just before she exited the room, she paused and added, You are not the first girl I've met who tried to steal something from the woods. They always think they're the first. The trees have a long memory. The door shut with a final thud, leaving Elisa to the shadows once more. The next day was grey as slate, and the guards were quieter than usual as Elisa was dragged from her cell to the prison yard for the ritual procession, one final humiliation before death. The unfinished 12th shirt was allowed to remain draped over her shackled arms, the nettles whispering with each step. The Queen Mother had permitted it, perhaps as a final mockery, or perhaps because she wanted to see what would happen. Crowds gathered outside the palace gates, drawn by the scent of spectacle. Some shouted curses, others tossed stones, but many simply watched, wide-eyed and unblinking, as the mute girl walked barefoot across the courtyard, a crown of silence woven into her hair. A priest trailed behind, muttering prayers for a soul they believed damned. The gallows stood like an altar of finality, looming at the edge of the square. But it was not the structure itself that chilled Elisa. It was the tree growing beside it, twisted, blackened, yet alive, its branches crooked like grasping fingers, and as she stepped closer, the air grew heavy with the scent of moss and blood. The weeping wood was here. She looked around and saw it, faint, almost imperceptible, beneath the cobblestones, between the cracks of the square. Roots curled like veins, tiny shoots of saplings pressed against the prison walls. Ivy coiled up the gallows support beams like eager hands. The forest had followed her. As the noose was fitted around her neck and the crowd murmured their anticipations, the priest paused in his reading. A wind stirred, fierce and sudden. It tore through the square like a scream, knocking hats from heads and silencing every tongue. The sky above turned a dull green. Elisa's heart thundered. Her hands clutched the nettle shirt with renewed urgency, though it remained unfinished. 11 were complete. 1 remained. She had failed. But as the executioner stepped forward and began the final rites, a cry pierced the air. Not human. Wings. Dozens of them. The swans. They descended like phantoms from the unnatural sky. 12 in all, wingspan wide as sails. The crowd scattered in terror. The executioner dropped the lever and fled. Even the priest fell to his knees. Elisa looked up through teary eyes as the swans circled overhead, elegant, pale, and watching her with human sorrow. One landed before her, nuzzling at the shirt draped across her arms. Her oldest brother. His eyes still bore the haunted look of a man locked in feathers. She tried to raise the shirt, but her arms were bound. The crowd watched in horror and awe as the remaining swans flew at the gallows, tearing at the supports, slashing ropes with beaks and talons. The structure groaned, swayed, and finally cracked. The noose dropped. Elisa fell, not to her death, but to her knees. The youngest swan flapped toward her, dragging something between its beak. A knife. With trembling hands, Elisa grasped it and slashed the bindings at her wrists. Blood bloomed. The nettle shirt fell free. 11 brothers, 11 shirts, and now she lifted the 12th, incomplete, threads hanging loose like veins. She turned to her brothers, one by one, and threw the shirts across their bodies. One after another, they shimmered and screamed, not with pain, but release. Their wings folded, feathers vanished, limbs grew long and human once more. When she reached the youngest, the final shirt only half finished, he transformed, but not fully. One arm remained feathered, the hand a wing. Elisa broke into sobs, but the boy only smiled and whispered, "You saved us." The Queen Mother stepped forward at last, flanked by her guards, but the forest had already decided. Behind her, the twisted black tree split down the middle with a deep, wet groan. From its interior poured a thick, red sap that smelled like rot and roses. Roots lashed from the ground and coiled around the gallows, around the Queen's guards, dragging them screaming into the dirt. The Queen herself did not move. She stood, defiant, until one final root snaked around her ankle. Her last words were not a scream. "They always think they're the first," she whispered, and the forest swallowed her. Later, the square lay in ruin. No one dared speak of what they saw. The church declared it a miracle. The peasants called it a curse. The brothers, now fully human, carried Elisa through the ravaged streets as the weeping wood spread behind them, quiet but not forgotten. The unfinished shirt was buried beside the gallows, and each night the soil around it pulsed like a heartbeat. Elisa would never speak again, not because she had to, but because the silence had grown too deep inside her. And far away, in the woods that weep, the trees began to whisper a new name. Elisa. The night pressed close around Elisa, thick and soupy, and for once she welcomed it. The sun no longer punished her skin with its unrelenting gaze. It had turned away, or perhaps it had blinked in fear of what crawled beneath the roots. The cave she had followed the black swan into was deeper than it first appeared, twisting downward in hewn stairs of old stone and gnarled bark, the walls pulsing faintly with veins of sap that gave off no light, only scent, bitter, earthy, with a hint of rot. She had long since dropped her remaining nettles. No weaving here. Her hands hung limply at her sides, fingers blistered and blackened. The pain had dulled to something like hunger, gnawing at her bones. She welcomed that too. Pain reminded her she was still human, whatever that meant now. The black swan, the twisted brother, led her into a chamber below the roots, where silence pressed so heavily it ached. The walls here were not stone, but carved wood, bleached white as bone, shaped into faces. They stared at her, hundreds of faces, sculpted into the grain, each frozen in agony or awe. Some had hollow mouths stretched wide in eternal screams. Others wept sap from their eyes. The trails hardened into amber tears. She recognized one of them, no, many of them, girls, all with her face, not sisters, not family, reflections. This was what the weeping wood remembered of them. The black swan came to a stop before a strange altar, a cradle grown from bark and thorn. Something lay inside, wrapped in a gown of rotted silk and green moss, skeletal arms cradling an object at its chest. A shirt, one of the nettle garments. Elisa's breath hitched. Her knees buckled beneath her, but the swan caught her with one outstretched wing. She looked up. The corpse in the cradle wore her face too. This one was fresher. The eyes had not rotted away, but were open, milk glazed and eerily focused. Not dead, Elisa realised with a jolt, or not entirely. As if to confirm her horror, the lips cracked open. "You are the last," it rasped. "The weeping wood remembers you best." Elisa opened her mouth, the old instinct bubbling up, but nothing came out. Her voice had been gone so long, it no longer obeyed her. The corpse chuckled, wet and wheezing. "Your silence brought you time, not salvation." Behind her, the chamber pulsed. Roots descended from the ceiling, writhing like worms. They coiled around the carved faces, tightening as if drawing breath or anticipation. "You think," the corpse croaked, "you are saving them, your brothers, but the wood does not bargain. It tricks. The curse is older than any queen, older than the first curse breaker." Elisa shook her head slowly, as if that could deflect the words, but she couldn't pretend. She had seen too much. The girls in the trees, the way the forest took their silence and wove it into roots. The shirts were not gifts of healing, they were bindings. "They are not swans," the corpse said gently. "Not anymore, not since the weeping queen took them." Elisa's mind sparked at the name, Weeping Queen. She remembered it from the whispering tree, the one she bled into, a name uttered by roots and rot. "You brought your brothers back, piece by piece, but not as they were." The black swan let out a low hiss. Its feathers began to fall off, drifting to the ground like ashes. Beneath them, flesh pulsed, raw, half-formed. Her brother Eric stood there, no longer twisted, but wrong. His eyes were too large, his teeth too flat, a person grown from a memory of being human. "Why?" Elisa mouthed, though no sound came. The corpse's brittle neck cracked as it tried to tilt. "To make you finish. The forest cannot devour what is scattered. It must be sewn together." 11 shirts, Eric said, his voice low and reverent. 11 binds, one for each fragment of the queen. We, your brothers, are her pieces, torn into birds, scattered across time. You were made to stitch us back together. Elisa's world tilted. She wanted to scream. She wanted to undo every stitch she had sewn. "But you were human," she mouthed. "No," Eric said. "We wore human. She wore us all. We forgot until the stitching began." Elisa turned and fled. Her legs barely obeyed her. The tunnels seemed longer now, the walls flexing in and out with sap-dripping lungs. She stumbled through pools of amber that hissed as she passed. The forest did not try to stop her. It waited. When she emerged, morning had broken, not with sunlight, but with a low red gloom that painted the weeping wood in shades of old blood. The nettle patches had grown, no longer sparse. They blanketed the forest like disease, and in the clearing where she once sat weaving, there were others, girls, dozens of them. All wore ragged green gowns, hands swollen and blackened, mouths sewn shut with thread that glinted like silver. They moved in slow circles around her discarded work. They were not alive. Elisa staggered into the circle. They did not react. Their eyes were cloudy, their breath shallow. They wove by memory alone. Each shirt was nearly finished. She dropped to her knees before them, trembling. What was she to do? The curse was no curse. It was a summoning. She was being used to bring back something older, something hungry, and yet her brothers, something of them still lived in the swans. She had seen their tears, heard their sobs in the dark. Could she unravel it? Would speaking now undo it, or doom it faster? She looked down at her blistered hands. The final shirt was almost complete. Only one remained. That night, the swans came. All 11 circled above the clearing, their feathers falling like snow. They did not land. They watched. Elisa stood slowly. She raised her hand. 11 fingers, 11 shirts. But she did not pick up the last one. She stepped into the center of the circle of dead girls, took a deep breath, and screamed. Her voice burst from her throat like flame, hoarse and broken, tearing at her insides. No more! The nettles writhed, the ground shuddered, the trees groaned as their roots tore upward like claws. The weeping wood howled, the girls stopped moving, and for the first time since she had entered this cursed forest, the wind blew outward, pushing, driving the forest back. Elisa fell to her knees. Her throat felt split open, her scream echoing endlessly. Above her, the swans scattered, panicked, afraid. The final shirt lay untouched beside her. The forest had blinked, but the queen, she was still waking. Elisa had not wept in weeks, not when her hands blistered into raw meat, not when the weeping wood whispered her name like a mourning dirge, not even when the thorn maidens clawed at her throat in the night. But now, kneeling atop the execution platform, beneath a sky boiling with unnatural clouds, she trembled, not from fear for herself, but for what would happen if she failed, if she broke her silence now, if she screamed when the executioner's axe swung toward her neck. Then her brothers would be lost, and the forest would win. The king stood behind her, face pale, unreadable. His ministers murmured like wasps. The bishop held a crucifix so tightly the wood cracked. "She's bewitched," someone cried. "A forest bride. A witch." "Let the axe fall." Elisa closed her eyes. Her skirts were torn, dirtied with weeks of toil and ash. Around her neck, the last nettle shirt sat heavy and unfinished. The sleeves were intact, but the collar was missing, the neckline still frayed. She had only to slip them over her brothers, now circling above in desperate loops of feather and panic, and the curse would be broken if she could hold on, if she could last a little longer. A bell tolled, a second. The crowd drew in a collective breath. And then wings thundered overhead. The sky exploded with white. 11 swans dove down like falling stars, shrieking and tearing through the crowd. The guards drew swords, but the brothers did not attack. They hovered in formation above their sister. Wings flared wide, encircling her in a living shield. "She is no witch," cried a voice from the crowd. A hooded figure pushed through the gathering. Her gait was awkward, halting. Her hands were wrapped in green-stained linen, her face shrouded, but Elisa recognized her instantly. The girl who had come before her, the other spinner, the one who had failed. "I couldn't do it," the girl rasped. "But she can. She did. She wove through blood and bone. She bled so the curse could break. Don't let the wood take her." The bishop hesitated. The axe wavered. The crowd, momentarily stilled, gasped as one of the swans landed beside Elisa and bowed its long neck to the earth. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She reached for the first shirt. The sleeves crackled with thorns and nettle fibres still alive. Her blistered fingers trembled, but she lifted the cloth and began to pull it over the first swan's neck. The cloth shimmered. Feathers melted into skin. Wings curled into arms. The swan screamed, not a bird's cry now, but a man's voice. The pain of transformation burned through the air. Her brother collapsed before her, human again, sobbing. Elisa gasped through her nose and moved to the next. Another shirt, another scream, another man restored. The crowd fell utterly silent. 6 swans transformed, then 8, then 10. 10 brothers knelt around her, pale and trembling. But the 11th swan, the youngest, waited, his wings bound tight. She reached for the final shirt. It was incomplete. The collar hadn't been finished. If she placed it on him, the transformation might halt, or worse, disfigure. She hesitated. The executioner lifted his axe again. Uncertain now, the bishop began to shout, something about demons and delusions, but she ignored them all. Elisa stood, trembling, the final shirt in her hands. Her voice had not been used in weeks. Her silence had been total, but now she looked her youngest brother in the eye and mouthed, "Forgive me." She draped the shirt over his body. Feathers burned away in a rush of wind. Flesh returned, except for one arm, which remained a swan's wing, white and trembling. He fell forward, half man, half bird, and behind them all, the weeping wood screamed, not aloud, but inside them. The wind howled in reverse. The trees lining the distant horizon convulsed, as if in agony. A black shape tore across the clouds, the weeping queen. She rose like a shadow stitched into the sky, her body made of tangled roots and grieving faces, her crown a halo of nettles that bled endlessly. Her voice was a dirge. "You would unbind what I have rooted, you who fed from me, bled into me, carried me within every thread." The earth cracked, trees split open, the weeping mouths upon every trunk howled. Elisa clutched her brothers, her voice raw in her throat. "The forest will never have them again." The queen extended her hand. Nettles burst from the ground like spears, ripping through stone and ash. But something else stirred behind the queen. A host of ghostly figures emerged, girls in torn dresses, their mouths sewn shut with thorn thread, the failed ones, the spinners who had come before. They surrounded the queen, not in fear, but in defiance. One by one, they reached up and tore the thorns from their lips. Their mouths bled. They screamed, not words, but a sound older than language, a rupture in the forest's will. The queen staggered. The thorn maidens rushed her, pulling her down into the soil, limb by shrieking limb. Their fingers dug into her crown, into her chest, her body split apart into vines and rotten wind. The ground closed over her, the air fell silent, and the weeping wood wept no more. Elisa stood at the edge of the now still forest. The trees no longer whispered, the nettles had withered. The other girls, the ones who had helped banish the queen, smiled, no longer hollow, no longer lost. One by one, they vanished like mist. Only one remained, the girl who had spoken for her at the execution. She approached, and for the first time showed her face, scarred, worn, beautiful. "I never thought it could end," she whispered. "But you finished what none of us could. You ended her." Elisa embraced her, her voice raw and barely human. "I didn't do it alone." Behind them, her brothers stood, 11 once more, even if one bore a wing instead of an arm. The king stepped forward, crown in hand. "You've saved us from a curse we didn't even understand." But Elisa turned to the forest. Its silence was not empty, it was peaceful. At last, she took one step toward it, then another. Her brothers called to her, but she shook her head. "I will not rule," she whispered. "I will rest." And she walked into the woods, no longer weeping, and was never seen again.